What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 4 of the show where the news never ends. This episode was brought to you by Hot Cheetos, the best chips on the market. Don't at me. Today we're going to talk about one of the latest pardons to be handed down by President Trump to conservative commentator Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh was a policy advisor for Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, and he's been a long-time critic of President Obama and the Clinton family. In 2014, he was found guilty of violating campaign finance law by making illegal contributions to the campaign of Wendy Long using the names of other people. Now, what Dinesh did to be found guilty of campaign finance fraud is he had his wife, his mistress, and his mistress's husband each donate $5,000 to the campaign of Wendy Long, and when Dinesh had these people donate to her, he promised that he would reimburse them. Now, the reason this is illegal is because the limit on an individual campaign contribution is $5,000. There's a cap on the amount that a single person can give to a campaign so that that person doesn't have an overriding influence on the candidate that they're donating to. And Dinesh seems to know the law and seems to know that this is illegal because he went through what is called straw donors, which can't count as individual campaign contributions since he's paying them back. Now, you may be wondering why I mentioned that he's a conservative commentator alongside an unrelated crime that he was convicted for. This is because Dinesh himself thinks that his arrest and conviction is a direct result of his political viewpoints and criticism towards prominent Democrats.
I became suspicious that part of the reason I was being targeted was because I did something very upsetting to a very narcissistic president.
Back in 2012, he made a film called 2016 Obama's America, where he gives his interpretation of President Obama's beliefs and policy decisions.
Obama has a dream from his father, that the sins of colonialism be set right and America be downsized.
So, was he treated unfairly? Let's examine the facts of the case. In a motion to try to dismiss the case, Dinesh's lawyer cites the Supreme Court case McCutcheon versus Federal Election Commission to say that it is not illegal to make campaign contributions in the names of other people. But upon closer inspection, the Supreme Court case did actually uphold the existing contribution limits. That means what Dinesh did was still illegal. He even admitted guilt at his plea hearing, saying, "I knew that causing a campaign contribution to be made in the name of another was wrong and something the law forbids." An additional point that Dinesh's lawyer hits on is that it was startling and unusual to see the FBI get involved in his case compared to other cases. So let's look at a similar case. Back in 2013, Florida real estate developer and GOP donor Jay Odom also used straw donors to contribute a total of $23,000 to a campaign committee. The FBI was brought on this case as well. Odom ended up being found guilty of causing a campaign committee to make false statements to the FEC. Though he was found and pleaded guilty to the same crimes as Dinesh, this guy got 5 months in a federal prison, in contrast with Dinesh's 8 months in a community confinement center. After Dinesh was sentenced, the New York Times even reported that he said, "I'm just happy I can pay my debt to society and get on with my work." Though Dinesh's lawyer argues that there was, quote, "no criminal or corrupt intent," Dinesh still acknowledges that what he did was illegal. The reason these campaign finance laws exist in the first place is to stifle any potential corruption that money could have on a candidate. But because Dinesh was caught and Wendy Long didn't win the Senate seat, we really have no way of proving whether the money would have had any lasting influence on Wendy. On the surface, it could be argued that the amount that Dinesh gave couldn't possibly have a corrupting influence on Wendy. But on the other hand, if the Justice Department were to let this slide, it would give the impression that straw donors would have some wiggle room if their contribution wasn't considered a huge sum. And this would also leave some wiggle room for potential corruption. Now that we know some facts on the case, let's do a quick little run through of Dinesh's claims in his little TV spots.
Allison, no American in this country's history has ever been prosecuted, let alone locked up, for doing what I did.
Now, as we mentioned before, there was someone locked up for doing almost the exact same thing he did.
In reality, this is how this kind of thing happens. The government says to you, we're going to charge you with violating the campaign finance law. Are you going to plead guilty or not guilty? You say, I'm thinking of pleading not guilty. Then the government says, well, all right, we're now going to put a second charge on top of that.
In this clip, Dinesh gives the impression that he only pleaded guilty because there was a second charge that was going to be added on right before he entered his plea. In reality, the second charge was already listed on the formal indictment.
Remember, there's no corruption even alleged in my case. So if you can find me a case, Allison, where somebody gave 20 grand with no corruption and got a more severe penalty than I did, I will completely withdraw this claim.
He keeps repeating this line, saying that there is no evidence of criminal intent, but because he got caught and Wendy Long didn't win, we really don't know if there ultimately was criminal intent. In my opinion, the case doesn't really show any evidence that Dinesh was targeted for his political viewpoints. I mean, he committed a crime, he was tried for the crime, he admitted guilt to the crime, and he was eventually found guilty of the crime. Why Donald Trump decided to pardon him, I think, shows more evidence of the president's own political bias towards Dinesh's case than the bias he claims that the prosecution had.
America has a dream from our founding fathers that together